Benito Mussolini. He spent years telling Italians he would restore the glory of ancient Rome. He ended up hanging upside down from a gas station roof. By April 1945, the man who had ruled Italy for over 2 decades had nothing left. His alliance with Hitler had destroyed the country. Allied forces were closing in from the south, and partisan fighters controlled the north. Mussolini made a run for it. He disguised himself in a German military coat and slipped into a convoy heading for the Swiss border. It didn't work. On April 27th, communist partisans stopped the convoy at a checkpoint near Lake Como. They searched the vehicles and found him hiding among German soldiers. Mussolini, the great dictator, was crouching in the back of a truck like a frightened animal. He and his mistress, Clara Petacci, were held overnight. The next morning, a partisan commander named Walter Audizio arrived with orders. He took them both to a villa gate in the small village of Giulino di Mezzegra and shot them dead with a submachine gun. Then came the part the world would never forget. Their bodies were loaded into a van and driven to Milan, to a square called Piazzale Loreto. That location was not chosen by accident. Months earlier, Mussolini's forces had executed 15 partisans and left their bodies on public display in that exact spot. Now it was his turn. By dawn on April 29th, the bodies of Mussolini, Petacci, and several other executed fascist officials had been dumped on the ground. A crowd gathered fast. People kicked the corpses, spat on them, and fired more rounds into them. One woman reportedly shot Mussolini 5 more times, once for each of her sons who had died in his war. Then someone decided that wasn't enough. Both bodies were hoisted upside down from the roof of a gas station. They hung there while the crowd cheered beneath them. The man who had promised a new Roman Empire ended his life as a spectacle for an angry mob. He was 61 years old. Adolf Hitler. 2 days after Mussolini's body was strung up in Milan, the man who had dragged the world into the deadliest war in history shot himself in a concrete hole in the ground. By late April 1945, Soviet tanks were rolling through the streets of Berlin. The city was burning. The war was over in every way except officially, and Hitler knew it. He had retreated into the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, surrounded by a small circle of loyalists watching him come apart. On April 29th, he married Eva Braun in a brief ceremony inside the bunker. Both of them knew what was coming. The next afternoon, April 30th, Hitler said his goodbyes to the staff who remained. Then he and Eva walked into their private quarters and closed the door. Shortly after 3:30 in the afternoon, a single gunshot was heard. When staff entered the room, they found Hitler slumped on the sofa with a gunshot wound to his head. Eva was beside him, dead from cyanide. Forensic evidence confirmed what had long been suspected. Hitler had bitten down on a cyanide capsule and fired a bullet through his skull at the same moment. The bodies were carried up through the bunker and out through the emergency exit into the garden above. Staff doused them in petrol and set them alight while Soviet artillery shells landed close enough to shake the ground. The flames burned for hours. He was 56 years old. The man who had ordered the deaths of tens of millions chose a quiet, private exit. No trial, no prison cell, no moment of public reckoning. Just a locked door and a gunshot no one was meant to hear. Joseph Stalin. The most feared man in the Soviet Union lay dying on his own floor for 12 hours. Nobody came, not because they didn't know, because they were too scared to open the door. On the night of March 1st, 1953, Stalin hosted one of his famous late-night dinners at his dacha outside Moscow. His inner circle was there, the same men who lived in constant terror of his purges and midnight arrests. Sometime around 4 in the morning, Stalin dismissed them and went to bed. By morning, nothing. No summons, no movement, no sound from his room. Guards noticed as early as the morning of March 1st that something was wrong. Stalin always called for staff by mid-morning. The silence stretched on for hours, and no one moved. That was the world Stalin had built. A world where the people closest to him were more afraid of his anger than his death. So they waited. They paced outside his door, and they waited. By the evening of March 2nd, someone finally worked up the nerve to look inside. They found the 74-year-old dictator lying on the floor in a pool of his own urine. He had suffered a massive stroke and had been lying there helpless for nearly half a day. Doctors were rushed in. Stalin lingered for 3 more days, unable to speak, his face twisted, slowly fading. Some historians believe the delay in checking on him was not entirely accidental. Others suspect his own officials may have withheld medical help deliberately. The truth has never been confirmed. On March 5, 1953, Stalin died. Across the Soviet Union, the announcement triggered an eruption of public mourning. But behind closed doors, the men who had spent decades fearing him quietly exhaled. The terror was over. It had just taken the terror itself to keep anyone from saving him. Rafael Trujillo. He ran the Dominican Republic like a private estate for 31 years. He had thousands tortured, disappeared, and killed. On the night of May 30th, 1961, someone finally decided to return the favor. Trujillo was being driven along a coastal highway outside Santo Domingo when several cars suddenly cut off his route. The men waiting outside those cars were not strangers. Many of them were military officers who had served directly under him. They had been planning this for months, with quiet backing from the CIA, who had supplied 3 M1 carbine rifles used in the ambush. The shooting was brutal and fast. Trujillo's car was torn apart by gunfire. Some accounts say he managed to draw his own pistol and fire back before the bullets found him. By the end, the 69-year-old dictator was dead on the side of a highway, killed by the same kind of violence he had spent decades ordering against others. What followed was chaos. The conspirators loaded his body into one of their cars and immediately began arguing about what to do next. For hours, Trujillo's corpse sat in the trunk of a vehicle while his killers debated their next move. Loyalist forces eventually recovered the body. Some of the conspirators were caught and executed. Others fled the country. The Dominican Republic fell into political turmoil that lasted years. Trujillo had controlled everything and everyone for 3 decades. In the end, it was the men he trusted most who put him in the ground. Nicolae Ceausescu. He ruled Romania for over 2 decades and believed his people loved him. He found out the truth on Christmas Day, 1989, in front of a firing squad. By December 22nd, anti-communist protests had overwhelmed the capital. Ceausescu and his wife Elena attempted to flee Bucharest by helicopter as crowds stormed the government buildings. They were captured within hours. 3 days later, on Christmas morning, the couple was brought to a small room at a military base in Târgoviște and put on trial. The proceedings lasted less than 2 hours. The charges included genocide and the theft of state funds on a massive scale. Elena repeatedly interrupted, insisting the trial was illegal. Ceausescu refused to recognize the court's authority at all. It made no difference. The verdict was death. Minutes after it was delivered, both were led outside to a courtyard wall. A firing squad lined up. There were no final statements, no last words beyond the protests they had already made inside. The soldiers opened fire. Both Ceausescu's dropped almost instantly, their bodies hit by over 100 rounds. The execution was filmed. That evening, Romanian television broadcast the footage alongside the announcement of their deaths. The images spread across the world fast. Viewers watched a man who had ruled a nation for 24 years go from power to execution in 72 hours. The camera crew, it turned out, missed the opening shots. The whole thing moved so fast that even the people filming it couldn't keep up. Pol Pot. He was responsible for the deaths of up to 2 million people. He died in his sleep in a jungle hut and never answered for a single one of them. After the Khmer Rouge regime collapsed in 1979, Pol Pot vanished into the jungle near the Thai border. He lived there as a fugitive for nearly 20 years while the rest of the world demanded accountability. By 1998, he was 73 years old, frail, and under house arrest by a splinter group from his own former movement. On April 15, 1998, he was found dead. The official cause was heart failure. The timing was impossible to ignore. Just days earlier, the remaining Khmer Rouge leadership had agreed to hand him over for an international war crimes tribunal. Within days of that agreement, he was dead. Suspicions spread immediately. Had he taken his own life to avoid the trial? Had someone poisoned him to prevent him from talking? No autopsy was ever properly conducted, and the answers never came. What happened next said everything about how his former comrades viewed the situation. Knowing the world would be skeptical, they invited journalists to come and photograph the body. Images of Pol Pot's corpse appeared in newspapers across the globe, just to prove that he was really gone. Then they cremated him on a pile of rubbish and old car tires. No courtroom, no testimony, no moment where the survivors could look him in the eye. The man who had turned Cambodia into a mass grave went out quietly in the dark and let the fire take the rest. Augusto Pinochet. He seized power in a bloody coup, ran a regime that tortured and killed thousands, and then spent his final years doing everything possible to avoid standing trial for any of it. Pinochet took control of Chile in September 1973, overthrowing the elected government of Salvador Allende. For 17 years, his regime operated a machinery of disappearances, torture centers, and executions. When he finally handed over power in 1990, he assumed he was untouchable. He was almost right. In 1998, he was arrested in London on a Spanish warrant for human rights violations. The legal battle that followed lasted years. He was eventually released on medical grounds and returned to Chile, where multiple indictments were waiting. His lawyers fought every case the same way, arguing he was too old, too sick, and too mentally diminished to face trial. The cases dragged forward and stalled repeatedly. He was placed under house arrest and indicted for numerous abuses, but a final verdict never came. Every time proceedings advanced, his health conveniently deteriorated. On December 3, 2006, Pinochet suffered a massive heart attack and was rushed to a military hospital in Santiago. Surgeons operated, complications followed. His lungs began filling with fluid. On December 10, 2006, he died. He was 91 years old. The date was not lost on anyone. December 10th is International Human Rights Day, marking the anniversary of the United Nations' adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. The man who had spent decades violating those rights died on the exact day the world chose to celebrate them. Some Chileans celebrated in the streets. Others mourned. He was cremated shortly after, and his ashes were divided among family members. He never spent a single day in prison, not one. Saddam Hussein. His execution was supposed to be controlled and solemn. Instead, it turned into one of the most controversial moments in modern history, and someone filmed the whole thing on a cell phone. After the US-led invasion of Iraq and a lengthy trial for crimes against humanity, Saddam Hussein was sentenced to death by hanging. On the morning of December 30, 2006, the 69-year-old former dictator was led into an execution chamber at a military base in Baghdad. Official protocol was supposed to keep the proceedings dignified. It didn't. As Saddam stood on the gallows with the noose already around his neck, the guards in the room began taunting him. Sectarian insults flew. Witnesses chanted the name of Shia cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. Saddam responded with calm defiance, reciting prayers as the chaos continued around him. Then the trapdoor opened and it was over. The cell phone footage leaked online within hours. The grainy video showed everything. The insults, the chanting, the moment the floor dropped. It spread across the internet and onto television screens worldwide almost instantly. The reaction was immediate and deeply divided. Some saw justice delivered to a man responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths. Others condemned the spectacle, arguing that even a man like Saddam deserved a death carried out with basic dignity. Several world leaders publicly criticized the way the execution had been handled. His body was returned to his family, and he was buried in his hometown of Tikrit. The trial had lasted years. The execution lasted minutes, and the footage that was never supposed to exist reached every corner of the world before sunrise. Muammar Gaddafi. He ruled Libya for 42 years. He built a cult around himself so extreme that his face appeared on everything from postage stamps to school textbooks. On October 20th, 2011, rebels found him hiding in a drainage pipe and dragged him out into the street. As Libya's civil war tore through the country, Gaddafi fled Tripoli when rebel forces closed in. He made it to his hometown of Sirte, where he held out for weeks. NATO airstrikes eventually destroyed his convoy as he tried to escape. Gaddafi survived the strike and scrambled away from the wreckage with a handful of remaining bodyguards. He crawled into a concrete drainage pipe and hid. When rebel fighters found him, the footage started immediately. Multiple cell phones captured what happened next. A bloodied, disoriented Gaddafi was hauled out into the open, his face swollen, his clothes torn. In one video, his voice is clearly heard asking what he had done wrong. The rebels showed no interest in answering that question. What exactly happened in the minutes that followed remains disputed, but Gaddafi was shot in the head and died shortly after being pulled from that pipe. His body was taken to Misrata, where it was placed inside a commercial cold storage room in a local shopping center. For days, long lines of Libyans filed in to see and photograph the corpse of the man who had controlled every aspect of their lives for 4 decades. He was eventually buried in an unmarked grave in the desert. Location undisclosed. The man who had once addressed the United Nations for 90 minutes, who had slept in a tent on the lawns of foreign capitals, and who had called himself the King of Kings of Africa, was put in the ground without a name on the stone. Kim Jong-il. He told his people he was almost superhuman. State propaganda claimed he could control the weather and had never once needed to use a bathroom. On December 17, 2011, the dear leader died of a heart attack on a train, and his government hid it from the world for 51 hours. Kim Jong-il had ruled North Korea since 1994, maintaining one of the most isolated and brutal regimes on Earth. His people starved while he built nuclear weapons. Hundreds of thousands were locked in prison camps. He cultivated a personality cult so extreme that public displays of grief at his appearances were mandatory, not optional. Behind the mythology, his body was failing. He had suffered a stroke in 2008 and had been quietly managing diabetes and heart disease for years. On December 17th, he was traveling aboard his private train when he suffered a massive heart attack. He was 69 years old. He died on the train. North Korean state television said nothing. For 2 days, the country's most powerful broadcaster, KCTV, continued its normal programming without a word. Then, 51 hours after Kim Jong-il actually died, a famous news anchor named Ri Chun-hee appeared on screen, dressed entirely in black. She wept as she read the announcement. State television then broadcast footage of citizens collapsing in the streets, wailing, bowing before his portraits, and throwing themselves to the ground in anguish. Whether the grief was genuine or performed out of fear, the images were unlike anything most of the world had ever seen. His body was embalmed and placed in a glass coffin at the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun in Pyongyang, where it remains on permanent display alongside the embalmed body of his father, Kim Il-sung. Unlike almost every other dictator in this video, Kim Jong-il died peacefully. No bunker, no firing squad, no drainage pipe. Just a heart attack on a train and a government that spent 2 days deciding how to tell the world. Power passed immediately to his son, Kim Jong-un. The dynasty continued without a single day of interruption. Some men build systems designed to outlast them. Kim Jong-il built one that didn't even flinch when he was gone.